Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the wind-bitten wilds of medieval Scotland, a place where even your dreams might wear a kilt and punch you in the face. It's the 13th century, and your bed is a pile of straw stuffed into the corner of a smoke-darkened hut made of stone, wood, and whatever else the wind hasn't stolen yet. Your mattress is lumpy, your feet are frozen, and you've just woken up to the delightful scent of boiled oats and animal dung. Welcome to the Highlands, where every day is a survival challenge, and no one's handing out trophies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your local time and where you're listening from. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun because the sun doesn't really care about your sleep schedule. There's no rooster, just the insistent howling of wind slipping through gaps in your walls like a thief. You wrap your plaid, the great kilt, tight around your shoulders and pray your fire hasn't gone out. It has. Of course it has. You stumble over the dog snoring by the hearth, kick a bucket you forgot to move, and start breathing into your hands like it might actually help. It won't. There's frost on the inside of the walls, and your teeth have already filed a formal complaint. Breakfast? It's a wooden bowl of thin brosy oats stirred into lukewarm water with maybe a sliver of salted fat if you're lucky. The porridge clings to the spoon like it's afraid to be eaten, which is ironic because you're not entirely convinced it counts as food. Still, you scrape it down because the alternative is starving, and no one's got the energy for that today. Outside, the air cuts sharper than a blade, and your boots made from stitched-together scraps of hidea soaked from yesterday's snowmelt. You trudge out to check on the single cow tethered in the byre. She's cranky, frost-coated, and eyeing you like she deserves better. She's not wrong. If she dies, you lose milk, butter, and maybe next year's calf. You pat her nose and whisper, "Please don't die today." That's about as religious as you get before sunrise. Your home isn't exactly cozy. It's one room for everyone, parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent or two, plus the occasional chicken and the dog who earns his keep by barking at the shadows. You share everything: sleeping space, chores, even lice. Walls are stone and moss, the roof's timber and thatch, and there's no chimney, so smoke just kind of lingers. You're basically living in a fog machine designed by sadists. Your clothes? A tunic, maybe two if you're rich, and that heavy wool kilt you wrap and rewrap all day like it's both armor and blanket. Underwear? Not really a thing yet. Washing? That depends on whether the river's thawed and whether you've got time between digging, herding, and hauling. You don't own much. A wooden spoon, a shared knife, a pot that's half rust, a comb that pulls more hair than it detangles. There's a spindle for wool, a bag for grain, and a few relics from the saints if your family's the praying type. One historical detail: some Scottish crofters actually hung dried foxglove on their wall snot for decoration, but to ward off witches, which might have been more effective than the actual church at keeping curses away. Historians still argue whether Highland life was uniquely harsh or just average for medieval peasants. But there's no denying the Scottish terrain throws in some extra spice like sideways rain, hungry wolves, and the fact that your field's growing more rocks than barley. And winter doesn't arrive in Scotland, it moves in, raids your pantry, and overstays its welcome. There's not really a weekend. Every day brings the same back-breaking tasks. You dig peat to burn, fetch water from the loch, spin wool until your fingertips bleed, and make sure no chickens have mysteriously wandered off. If they have, guess what? That's tonight's dinner walking away. You see your village elders rarely smile, unless someone's betrothed, or someone's dead same facial expression, different context. And yes, funerals sometimes come with more bread than weddings. Why? Because death's the only predictable thing here. Still, there's a beauty in it. The heather blooms purple in spring. The lochs shine like silver under mist. On rare clear nights, you lie back and watch stars scatter across the sky so bright. It's like the gods finally remembered to turn the lights on. But beauty doesn't fill your belly or fix your frostbite. By the time you hit 30, you're an elder. By 40, you're either respected or buried. You carry that knowledge like a stone in your gut, same as your parents did, same as your children will, if they survive. You've got just enough warmth in your hands to grip the latch, and already there's shouting outside, two clansmen arguing over whose goats wandered into whose pasture. Again, you'd think they'd learn to tie them better, or maybe not raise goats in a place where grass is more wish than reality. But no, the feud goes back generations, maybe over grazing rights, maybe over a stolen bride, maybe someone just insulted the wrong grandmother in 1187. No one remembers anymore, but that doesn't stop them from picking up sticks like it's a sacred tradition. Clan life is everything in medieval Scotland. You don't have a last name in the modern sense, you have a clan name. That's your shield and your target, depending on where you are. MacDonald, MacLeod, Fraser, Campbell, they're not just names. They're who you fight for, who you die for, who you curse if they wrong you. You're born into a web of loyalty that binds tighter than iron and bites just as deep if it snaps. Of course, not all clans are friendly with each other. That would be too convenient. The moment you travel beyond your glen, you're checking tartan patterns like modern folk check license plates. Is this one safe? Is that one your father once insulted over cattle? And if you're not sure, you'd best keep walking, and not too confidently either. The truth is, most people don't travel far. Why would they? Every glen, every mountain pass, every stream has its own story, its own curse, its own sacred spring guarded by old wives who swear it healed a cousin's gout. You stay close to your own. The world beyond your village isn't just foreign, it's dangerous in ways that carry blades and don't bother with apologies. Within the clan, though, things aren't always harmonious. Sure, you share bread, shelter, and bloodlines, but you also share grudges, property disputes, and the occasional cousin who's convinced he's the rightful chief. And if someone steals a pig or seduces someone's sister, that's not a misdemeanor. That's a full-blown honor issue. One wrong move and your cousin's dragging you to the next glen with a torch and a blade longer than his patience. Mainstream history books like to paint clans as noble brotherhoods of proud warriors, and they were but only sometimes. The rest of the time they were gossiping, scheming, and watching each other like hawks with axes. You didn't just worry about English invasions. You worried about what your second cousin might do if he thinks your father promised him the South Field. Quirky fact? Clan feasts often involved something called black bun, a dense fruitcake wrapped in pastry and baked until it could survive a siege. Historians still debate whether it was meant to be eaten or just used as a weapon. Some say it was originally handed out during Hogmanay, New Year, passed from house to house like a festive brick. You eat a slice, smile politely, and quietly hope you're not the one keeping it next year. The chief of your clan lives slightly better than you, with a slightly less drafty haul and slightly more meat in his stew. He's supposed to protect you, enforce justice, and keep the peace. In reality, he mostly tries to avoid being poisoned by his rivals and listens to disputes that feel like dramatic soap operas, but with more livestock. He's often surrounded by retainers, basically cronies, who act like bouncers and tax collectors rolled into one itchy tartan. Justice, if you can call it that, is negotiable. Maybe the bard sings your praises and people believe your innocence. Maybe the priest says a few words and the curse on your family lifts. Maybe you give the chief a cow and he decides your opponent should stop complaining or face the woods. Official courts? Rare. Objective verdicts? Rarer. And if someone's cousin ends up mysteriously dead in the bog, it's usually followed by a lot of shrugging and some very tense singing at the next feast. Historians still argue whether clan loyalty protected the poor or exploited them. Some say the system allowed Highlanders to endure centuries of war and famine. Others say it locked families into cycles of poverty and violence that no one could escape, not even the chiefs. And of course, feuding wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was hilariously petty. One documented dispute involved a man who was accused of witchcraft not for casting a spell but because his beard grew suspiciously fast. Another time, a marriage proposal was rescinded after someone discovered the bride's family didn't kneel correctly during a funeral. Yes, that was apparently grounds for war. You can't just marry who you like either. Marriage is about alliances, dowries, and making sure your cousin doesn't marry someone from the wrong side of that one very old, very vague feud. Love matches exist, but mostly in songs. In real life, it's more like, here's the one lass not already promised to someone else. Good luck. Still, on feast days, when everyone's bellies are full and the fires are warm, you forget for a while. Bagpipes drone, drums echo off stone. The young dance, the old drink, and even your suspicious cousin stops glaring at your boots. For a few hours, the world softens. But tomorrow? Tomorrow, it all starts again. You're out by the byre again, patching a fence that looks like it's been attacked by both the weather and a particularly determined goat. That one-eyed beast keeps testing it like he's planning an escape to Norway. But you can't let him or any of your animals out of your sight. Because here's a hard truth of medieval Scotland. Your wealth isn't in coins or land deeds. It's in cows. Real, breathing, stubborn, smelly cows. And with wealth comes risk. Cattle raiding isn't some back-alley crimites, practically a national pastime. If your cow wanders, she might not come back. And if someone steals her, you can't just file a report. You saddle up your neighbours, grab a few rusty spears, and head off into the mist to reclaim your property. Or, steal something else in retaliation. Eye for an eye, hoof for a hoof. This is what's known as creech, a Highland raid. Sometimes small, sometimes massive. Sometimes it's a teenage rite of passage. Congratulations, you're 12. Time to go scare the McNabs and take their sheep. The logic is simple. Livestock equals survival. Meat, milk, leather, and manural in one grumpy package. Raiding isn't just desperation. It's status. A successful raid means your clan's strong. A failed one means embarrassment, wounds, or worse, your head stuck on a spike outside someone else's croft. You'd think people would try to de-escalate. But no, they make it personal. Poetic, even. Some chiefs send bards ahead to announce the raid because apparently, sneak attacks are for cowards, not poets. Sometimes you raid with a code. No killing, just scare and steal. But sometimes things spiral. A goat gets speared. A man gets insulted. Someone swings a sword. And suddenly, you're stuck in a generational blood feud where babies aren't even born yet but are already sworn enemies. Historians still argue whether Highland raiding was a form of cultural resilience or just chaos in plaid. Some say it forged tight community bonds and reinforced clan honour. Others say it was like living next to a volcano, with very strong opinions and a fondness for beef. To outsiders especially, the English this looked like madness. To you, it's just Tuesday. Here's your morning. Wake up, shovel manure. Hear rumours the McGregors have been spotted near the Western Ridge. You look at your cow, who's chewing her cud obliviously, and think, not today, Bessie, not again. You grab a dirk-short blade, sharp enough to do the job, and gather with a few men who all smell like turnips and bad choices. There are no uniforms, just tartan and fury. You move through the heather like ghosts, feet silent on wet peat, breath fogging in the early chill. Sometimes you find the thieves, sometimes they find you, and sometimes you find nothing but hoof prints and a lot of fresh cow dung that is definitely not your own. Punishments? Brutal. Get caught stealing cattle, and you might be stripped naked, tied to a post. Or if the chief's feeling especially theatrical, forced to sing a song confessing your crimes while everyone throws cabbages. That's if you're lucky. Unlucky? You're banished, branded, or buried. But let's say your cow's safe for now. You head back home, proud and muddy, only to discover your cousins decided it's your turn to resolve a different problem. One involving fences, pigs, and a love letter accidentally delivered to the wrong lass. You sigh. Clan politics never rest. On particularly bad days, you dream of escaping to a monastery. Quiet, warm, full of books and beer. But then you remember they make you shave your head, wear itchy robes, and wake up before dawn to chant in Latin. Also no cows. So, you stay. Quirky fact. Some Highlanders believed that smearing ash on a cow's horns would protect it from being bewitched. Others hung iron amulets in the barn to stop fairies from riding their livestock at night. That's right. You've got to worry about both raiders and supernatural cow joyriders. Because of course you do. You try to laugh about it when you can. During long evenings, people swap stories of raids gone wrong. The time old Fergus accidentally stole a bull and couldn't get it over the ridge without bribing it with honey. Or the legend of the cow that wandered back home 6 months later, fatter and wearing someone else's clan markings like a tattoo of shame. Still, the tension never really leaves. Every howl of wind, every snap of twig outside your hut could mean another raid, another feud, another sleepless night. You sleep lightly, your dirk under the blanket, one eye half open. And tomorrow, you do it all again. Because in Scotland, in this age, survival isn't just about farming. It's about holding onto your cattle, your kin, and your place in a world that tries to take all three. You finally make it to the nearest castle, if you can call it that. It's not the gleaming romantic towers you've seen in illustrations. This thing looks like a disgruntled barn got into a fight with a hill and lost. Thick, grey walls squat low under the weight of centuries of damp. The stones are blackened by soot, chipped by war, and perpetually weeping moisture like they've given up. And once you're inside, it's somehow even worse. The great hall is cold. Not chilly cold, like the inside of a forgotten cave. A fire blazes in the centre hearth, but it does nothing against the drafts curling in through arrow slits and gaps in the timber beams. Your breath fogs in front of your face. You're wearing 3 layers of wool, and still, your spine twitches from the chill. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Rotting rushes on the floor mixed with old meat, spilled ale, sweaty bodies, wet dogs, and just a dash of latrine. This place isn't clean so much as layered. You're walking on months of filth compacted into a kind of medieval mulch. Sometimes they sprinkle herbs over it, lavender, sage, tansy butt that's just putting perfume on a battlefield. Still, you're here, and this is technically where the important people live. The lord of this castle is a big deal. He holds sway over dozens of villages, commands men-at-arms, and taxes everyone to keep this damp pile of rock running. He's dressed a little finer than you, his tunic dyed with actual colour, maybe blue or green if he's fancy, and he wears a belt knife that's clearly more for show than slaughter. But nobility doesn't mean luxury. He sleeps on a slightly raised platform with a feather mattress if he's lucky and a tapestry to block the worst of the wind. The walls are cold, the roof leaks, and every night he wonders if one of his trusted guards will switch sides if war comes. There are no bathrooms. Chamber pots are used liberally, then dumped out windows onto the courtyard below. You're careful not to walk too close to the walls. You've learned the hard way that Gardy Lou means duck now, not later. You think maybe the kitchen will be better, maybe warm at least, and it is for about 5 seconds. Then your nostrils are assaulted by the scent of boiling tripe, rotting onions, and something that might be a squirrel, maybe not. The cook's got 1 eye, 3 knives, and no patience. He waves you out with a spoon still dripping questionable gravy. You pass servants carrying trenchers, those flat slabs of stale bread used as plates. After the meal, they're fed to the dogs, or to the poor, depending on how greasy and gross they've gotten. You're lucky to get one with only a few bite marks already in it. Quirky fact. Some lords installed murder holes above the entryways, not to intimidate their guests, but to pour hot oil or stones on anyone who entered uninvited. You glance up at one now, half expecting a servant to drop a bucket of surprise stew just to keep the tradition alive. Historians still argue whether these castles were genuine centres of protection or just power statements built to intimidate the locals. Sure, they offered shelter during a raid, but only if the lord liked you. Otherwise, you were stuck outside, pressed against the outer walls, praying no one dropped a rock on your head by accident. You wander the battlements and find the guard post. It's manned by 2 men too tired to be threatening. One's missing a few teeth, the other's carving something crude into a wooden beam. They nod to you without looking up. Everyone's tired, everyone's cold. You sit for a moment and watch the hills beyond, mist curling like spirits between the glens. When rain comes and it seeps through cracks in the stone and drips relentlessly into buckets placed throughout the castle. You sleep to the lullaby of plink, 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 counting each drop and wondering if the roof will collapse in your lifetime. Probably. Eventually. And yet, this is one of the better places to be. When war comes, the castle is where people gather. There's strength in stone, no matter how damp. Archers stand ready at the towers. Boiling water is prepped. Iron gates are slammed shut with a clang that echoes for miles. You may be miserable, but at least you're behind walls. Still, you can't help but feel like the castle's not protecting you from the world. It's protecting the world from what's inside. Ambition, fear, disease, greed. You've seen the Lord's men tax a starving family for failing to give enough grain. You've heard servants whipped for dropping a plate. You've watched nobles toast each other while villagers freeze outside. There's no democracy here, no appeals, just hierarchy carved into stone and sealed with blood. So when you finally leave the castle, back to your drafty hut and your cranky cow, you almost feel relieved. The stone might be strong, but it's not home. And in medieval Scotland, sometimes survival isn't about sheltering behind walls. It's about knowing when to run. The wind has turned. Again. It always does. 1 minute it's a soft push at your back. The next it's screaming in your face like an angry ghost. And in your village, That ghost has a name, or several, depending on who you ask. Morag, Bean Neag, the Kaliech figures from the dark folds of Highland folklore, part warning, part reality. You don't question them. You just throw another charm above the doorway and hope it keeps whatever's lurking out there away from your goats. But today, it's not fairies or banshees people are whispering about. It's her, the widow near the river, who cures colic with wildflowers and knows which mushrooms are safe to eat. The one who smiles at infants but talks to crows. Aye, they say she's got the second sight. And just like that, the air in the village changes. People start crossing themselves when she walks past. Children are told not to speak her name after sundown. You try not to look in her direction, but she nods at you anyway, calm as the loch on a windless morning. That night, someone's fire goes out unexpectedly, and the next morning, someone else's cow births a still calf. It doesn't take long. The whispers harden. She's cursed, someone mutters. She hexed the grain store. She killed her husband with a glance. You keep your head down and your mouth shut, because this isn't just gossip. It's a storm about to break. And when it does, someone's going to burn. This is how witchcraft accusations happen in medieval Scotland. Not because someone's casting fireballs or riding broomsticks, but because she knows too much. She heals with herbs. She doesn't attend mass. She talks to animals. That's enough. The Kirk doesn't take kindly to those who step outside its shadow. Superstition is the law behind the law here. Logic bows to fear, and reason gets drowned with a stone around its neck. The church calls it heresy. The villagers call it protection. You call it terrifying. And the tests they use? They're not subtle. One common trial. Tie the accused's thumbs to their toes, toss them into a pond and see if they float. If they do, it means the water has rejected them, they're guilty. If they sink, well, they were innocent, but also dead. A real lose-lose situation. Another? Make them recite the Lord's Prayer backward without stuttering. If they fumble, they're guilty. Which, let's be honest, anyone would. Even sober. Even if they hadn't eaten only boiled nettles for the last 3 days. Historians still argue whether the witch craze in Scotland was truly as widespread as in mainland Europe, but records confirm thousands of trials and hundreds of executions. Mostly women, often older, usually poor. Sometimes the accused confessed just to make the torture stop. Sometimes they begged the flames to be fast. Sometimes they laughed, and that scared the crowd even more. You remember one tale from a travelling monk-off, a woman who supposedly turned into a hare to steal milk from her neighbour's cow. She was shot with a silver coin from a sling, and later found wounded in bed. Proof enough, they said. She was hanged by morning. The quirky twist? The coin was melted down and made into a brooch, believed to protect the wearer from evil. It was stolen 5 times, and each thief reportedly died screaming about rabbits. You don't ask questions about that. And yet, despite the danger, belief in second sight persists. Some villagers treat it like a blessing. The seer who dreams of fish before a bountiful catch. The child who foretells the first frost. The shepherd who senses where lost lambs have wandered. It's not always fear, it's awe. Reverence. A belief that some people walk closer to the edge of the world than others. Still, you'd never admit to seeing anything yourself. Not unless you enjoy the smell of smoke and pitch. The paradox is suffocating. You pray at church on Sunday, then leave milk on the windowsill for the fae that night. You bow to the priest, then sprinkle ash in the doorway to stop the dead from wandering in. Your world is layered Christian on the surface, pagan just beneath, with a little panic laced through both. There's a young girl in the village, maybe 12, who mimics the widow. She copies her herb bundles, hums her strange songs, whispers to the hens. Some think it's innocent, others say it's starting again. You want to protect her, but protection in this place often looks like silence, and silence lets the firewood pile higher. You can feel the tension rising with the wind. And just like that, a goat dies unexpectedly, and someone starts pointing fingers. You watch from behind your peat stack as the widow's door is kicked in. She goes quietly, with that same calm she always had. The village gathers, the kirk bell tolls, and you know what comes next. You close your eyes. You smell the smoke before you see it. Later, no one speaks of it. The wind returns. The sky stays grey. But the girl? She's gone. No one knows where. Maybe she fled to the forest. Maybe she was taken by something worse. All you know is that the nights feel darker now, heavier, like the village exhaled something it shouldn't have. And the next time your fire flickers oddly, or your bread rises wrong, you whisper a name to the air quietly, fearfully, and hope the ghosts are still listening. You haven't eaten meat in weeks, maybe months. You're not keeping track anymore. There's nothing left to hunt. Close to the village, the deer are smart, the boars are dangerous, and the birds seem to know exactly when you step outside with a bow. So instead, you lean on what's always there. Oats. Not the fluffy, honey-drizzled kind from modern breakfast bowls, but the coarse, dry, endlessly repeated kind that taste like regret with a hint of ash. You mash them into gruel in the morning, bake them into flat oatcakes by evening, and if you're lucky, mix in wild garlic or a scrap of salted fish when the tide's been kind. If not, it's plain. Again, the fields you help tend aren't generous. The soil's rocky, the climate moody, and your tools are barely sharper than your elbows. Barley grows sometimes. Kale. If the sheep haven't found it first, turnips are your winter treasure if they don't rot in the ground. The one cow you protect like a family member gives milk when she feels like it. You churn what you can into a butter that smells a bit suspicious, but goes down with bread if you don't breathe too hard. And bread now, that's a dream. You don't get yeast like the baker's boy in Edinburgh. You mix sour milk with whatever ground grain you've got left, hope the fire's steady, and call it a loaf when it stops crumbling. Sometimes you sprinkle salt. Most times, you imagine it. Meat is for festivals, feasts, or funerals. A whole chicken is rare. A pig? That's a miracle. When a deer is brought in, everyone shares it, but by the time it gets to you, it's mostly sinew and skin. You stew it anyway, adding in bitter herbs and hoping the bones don't splinter. On lean days, and there are many, you chew boiled nettles and pretend they taste like greens. They don't. They taste like boiled disappointment. Historians still argue whether the Scottish diet was truly deficient or simply different. Some say the people were malnourished. Others argue they were remarkably healthy for peasants, surviving harsh winters on oats, dairy, and hardy root crops. Either way, it wasn't glamorous. You didn't eat to enjoy. You ate to stay upright. One time, a traveller passed through your village with a pouch of spiced cinnamon, cloves, and pepper. People gathered like he was a saint. He traded a thimble of nutmeg for 3 whole blankets. You got to smell the powder and promptly sneezed half of it into the wind. That was your spice experience. Worth it? Probably. You sometimes dream of salt herring, salty, smoky, and so heavily cured it could survive a shipwreck. It's not common inland, but when it arrives dragged up from coastal towns like a treasure, it's devoured in hours. Salting meat is a luxury. Most of what you get goes bad fast, so you eat it quick or boil it twice. And don't even think about waste. You eat everything. Feet, tongue, stomach. The word offal doesn't mean off limits. It means supper. Quirky fact? There's a pudding called cranachan, originally made with crowdy cheese, oats and honey. In today's world, it's a dessert. In yours, it's either a rare treat or the last thing left when everything else is gone. Honey is rare. Cheese is work. You try not to crave. You go foraging often. Not for fun, for survival. Wild garlic, berries, sorrel. You once tried mushrooms, but the old man who advised you had poor eyesight and no remaining teeth. So that night ended with you speaking fluent goose for 3 hours before passing out beside a peat fire. You've stuck to berries since. When the harvest fails, and it does, you tighten your belt, eat tree bark broth. Don't ask. And hope the priest doesn't preach too long on Sunday, because fainting in church is embarrassing. Everyone sees it, especially the girl who used to give you extra oatcakes when she had them. Now she doesn't. Now she just nods politely, lips thin, eyes tired. Feasts are supposed to lift your spirits. Imbolc, Beltane, Samhain ancient rhythms of fire and frost. But even then, there's often little to eat. You gather around fires, sing old songs, toss grain into the wind as an offering, and hope the next year is kinder. Some years, the song is all you get. Still, there's a comfort in the rhythm, the stirring of the pot, the creak of the grindstone, the smell of peat smoke clinging to everything. Your grandmother tells you that as long as you've got oats and salt and someone to share them with, you'll survive. She's not wrong. She's also the one who still insists that burying a fish head in the barley field will keep the crows away. You're not sure if it works, but you do it anyway. Because in medieval Scotland, you don't just eat to live, you eat to endure. The food is grim. The hunger is real, but somehow, every morning, you wake up, boil another pot, and start again. The bells start ringing long before dawn, and their deep, uneven toll echoes through the mist like a warning. You rise not because you're ready, but because you have to. Church is mandatory, even if your boots are soggy, even if your back feels like it's been snapped by a mule in your sleep. The kirk isn't just a place of worship here in medieval Scotland. It's the heart of the village's control system, wrapped in Latin chants and cold stone. You trudge along the muddy path, shoulders hunched against the drizzle, which feels like it's been falling for a week straight. The air is thick with the scent of wet wool and damp peat, and every step squishes. You pass the same sagging fences, the same bleating sheep, the same suspicious chickens that haven't laid a proper egg in days. When you finally reach the kirk, the door groans like it's in pain. Inside, it's no warmer than outside, but at least the wind stopped trying to slap you in the face. The priest is already there, dressed in heavy robes that smell like mould and incense. He nods, stone-faced, and begins the liturgy. You stand, kneel, mumble, kneel again. You don't speak Latin, but you know the rhythms, the cues. When to bow, when to cross yourself, when to look sorry. Everyone pretends to pay attention, but half the village is either asleep or planning what to plant next week. The Lord may be watching, but he's probably as cold and bored as the rest of you. But you don't skip church, ever, because the kirk isn't just about goad, it's about power. The priest isn't just your spiritual guide. He's also the local authority, the landlord, the tax collector, and occasionally, the informant. He knows who's been stealing turnips, who's not tithing properly, who got caught kissing the blacksmith's daughter behind the grain shed. Confession isn't about forgiveness, it's about leverage. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish priests were truly benevolent shepherds, or tools of elite control. Some were genuinely kind, offering food to the poor and prayers to the sick. Others were petty tyrants who wielded guilt like a club and collected indulgences with both hands. Either way, you tread carefully. You smile. You say, Amen, and you never, ever mention the time you saw him stumbling drunk from the tavern after midnight. The sermons are long. The benches are hard. The air smells like sheep and sweat. But the worst part? The superstitions. Not the ones from the pulpit, those are predictable. Fire, brimstone, eternal damnation. No, it's what happens after Mass that gets to you. The old women gather at the threshold, whispering about omens and signs. A crow on the chimney, a cracked egg, a dream of a white stag, all taken as serious warnings. You'd laugh, if it wasn't for the fact that the whole village takes it seriously. If someone dies, the mirrors are covered to stop their soul from getting trapped. If a baby's sick, they tie red thread around its wrist. If a sudden storm hits during harvest, it means someone's been cursed, and you'd better find out who before next Sunday. Quirky fact. In some regions of Scotland, people believed that ringing church bells could drive away evil spirits, not just metaphorically, literally. If crops failed, the priest might walk the fields swinging incense while someone rang a handbell, trying to chase off the fairies who were blighting the barley. You've seen it done. It didn't help. But everyone swore the next harvest was slightly less terrible. And it's not just spirits. There's the evil eye, to a glance that curses, a stare that sickens, a look that can curdle milk or rot your teeth. You catch someone glaring and suddenly people are spitting over their shoulders and blessing their cows. One girl in the village blinked too slowly and was blamed for 3 chickens dying and a well going dry. She had to walk barefoot in a circle 3 times while chewing rowan bark to prove she meant no harm. She never blinked slowly again. Even the kirk has its uneasy truce with these beliefs. The priest rails against paganism in his sermons, then quietly mutters a prayer when passing an old oak, said to house a guardian spirit. You once saw him drop a coin in a sacred spring and pretend he was just washing his hands. No one says anything. No one ever does. You leave church more tired than when you entered. Outside, the drizzles turn to full-blown rain, soaking your hood and running down your neck like cold fingers. You walk back past the stone wall where someone's carved a sun symbol to ward off illness. Past the ash tree people tie ribbons to when praying for fertility. Past the house with the iron horseshoe nailed above the lintel knot for the horse, but to keep the little people out. The modern mind might scoff at this blend of Christianity and folklore, but for you, it's all one world. The saints live beside the spirits. The Bible sits on the same shelf as the weathered charm your grandmother swore saved your uncle from drowning. You don't choose between them. You just survive with both. By the time you reach your hut, the fire's barely smouldering. You stir it back to life, shake the rain off your cloak, and hang your damp boots by the hearth. Outside, the bells keep tolling. Not for mass this time, but for a death. Someone's passed. You whisper a prayer, then knock twice on the wood for luck. The rain falls harder. The world spins on. You hear the drums first, thudding low through the hills like a heartbeat of war. Then the horn-long shrill, echoing off the stone, and wind like a scream stretched across the glen. You freeze mid-step, your arms full of firewood, and listen. One long note, then two short blasts. That's not a signal for a feast. That's not a warning about a wandering beast. That's a call to arms. And just like that, you're no longer a farmer, or a forager, or a thatcher. You're a warrior, or at least you're supposed to pretend to be one. You toss the firewood in a heap and sprint toward the village centre, your heart thudding in time with the drums. Around you, men are already arming themselves with whatever they have: old swords, worn axes, sharpened sticks that probably used to be walking staffs. One boy carries a frying pan. You make a mental note not to stand near him. There's no standing army in medieval Scotland. When war comes, it's not knights in gleaming armour, it's everyone. You, your brother, the drunk with the limp, the blacksmith who hasn't swung a weapon since the last raid 3 years ago. You're summoned by the fiery crosser charred wooden cross, dipped in blood and ash, passed from glen to glen, as the most urgent message of all. When you see it, you don't question. You grab your plaid, your dirk and your courage, and you go. Your lord or clan chief appears atop a craggy hill, bellowing commands and prayers in the same breath. The English are moving north again. Or maybe it's another clan settling a grudge. Or maybe it's just time to remind the lowlanders who owns these mountains. Either way, you're going. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish warriors were disciplined fighters or just angry mobs with bad haircuts. The truth? A bit of both. You train when you can, mostly with sticks and curses, and when battle comes, you rely on speed, surprise, and a frankly alarming willingness to scream while running downhill. It's not elegant, but it's effective. You march fast and light, wrapped in your great kilt, which doubles as blanket, cloak, and sometimes tent. You eat cold oatcakes and dried leeks. You sleep in hollows and under trees, shoulder to shoulder with men who snore like wild boars and smell like damp mutton. You say little, talking wastes breath. Instead, you sharpen your blade in silence and hope it holds up when it matters. Quirky fact: some clans would march into battle with pipers leading the charge bagpipes blaring so loudly it rattled the nerves of anyone within earshot. There's no scientific proof, but you're convinced the enemy ran away half the time just to escape the noise. Those drones and skirls could make even the bravest soul rethink their life choices. When the fighting starts, it's not the choreographed clashing you see in tapestries. It's fast, brutal, terrifying. People scream, steel flashes, bodies fall. You don't remember most of it, just flashes of movement, the crunch of something that shouldn't crunch, the slick feel of blood on your grip, the overwhelming smell of sweat, fear, and iron. You spot your cousin, half buried under 2 fallen men. You drag him out, not because you like him, he still owes you a duck butt, because he's yours. Clan means you don't leave anyone behind, even if they snore and cheat at dice. You tie his wound with your own sleeve, shove a dirk into his hand, and tell him to scream louder next time. Then you're off again, chasing the fleeing figures down the hillside, lungs burning, knees buckling, shouting a battle cry you barely understand but scream anyway. The enemy pulls back. Maybe it's the terrain, maybe it's the bagpipes, maybe it's the collective smell of 24 unwashed Scotsmen charging like enraged ghosts. But the line breaks, and they retreat, and you live another day. You stand at the crest of a hill, chest heaving, face numb, blood on your hands that may not be yours, and feel something you can't quite name: relief, grief, pride, terror, maybe all of it. Afterward, the dead are gathered. Sometimes there's time for burials, sometimes not. You say a quick prayer, dig with a stick, mark the graves with stones. One man hums a lullaby, too soft for the others to hear. No one speaks much. You eat cold bread, drink whatever's left in the flask, and stare into the dark. You return to your village with fewer than you left with. People line the path to welcome you, eyes scanning for sons, brothers, husbands. Some cry with joy, others don't cry at all. Just look at the empty space beside them and walk home in silence. That night, there's a fire. Not a feast, there's little food, but a fire to mark survival. Stories are told. Jokes are attempted. Someone sings a song about a warrior who stabbed an Englishman using only a broken comb. It's probably not true, but no one cares. You sit beside your cousin, now bandaged and milking the story for all it's worth, and you laugh, just once. Because in this world, war is a season like any other blooms. Storms, harvests, blood. And when it passes, you return to your fields, your fires, your lives, and you wait, because the drums will come again. You wake coughing, throat dry, chest tight. It's not just the peat smoke. Your bones ache, your joints burn, and your skin feels clammy even though the night was cold enough to freeze the buckets inside the hut. You're not alone. The neighbour's lad has a purple rash blooming across his jaw, and the blacksmith hasn't opened his forge in 3 days. People say he's gone grey in the face and can't speak. You don't need a priest to tell you something's wrong. Everyone knows what's creeping through the village. It's the pest. Again, plague, pox, fever, whatever name they give it this time, it always means the same thing. Death, quick and foul. It rides in with traders and travellers, slinks through the air like a ghost, and doesn't care if you're a crofter or a chieftain. When it arrives, it spreads faster than gossip, and it kills faster than blades. You wrap a scrap of wool over your nose and mouth, though you're not sure why. Maybe it helps. Maybe it's just something to do with your hands while you wait. Herbs are gathered nettles, yarrow, heather blossoms. The healer crushes them into a foul-smelling poultice and rubs it on your chest, muttering something between a prayer and a recipe. You drink a brew that tastes like rotten hay steeped in bog water, then lie back and try to sweat it out. The room swims. The thatch above you turns into waves. You're not sure if it's working or if you're just hallucinating. Honestly, either outcome feels like progress. There are no doctors, not here. Maybe in Edinburgh or Perth, if you could afford the travel and the coin. But out here, you rely on knowledge passed from mother to daughter, stories whispered beside hearths, and roots dug up in the dark. You remember hearing once that moss from the north side of a tree cures coughs. You tried it. It tasted like mud. Didn't help. But now you think of trees every time your chest tightens. Quirky fact. Some healers believed that burying a dead toad in a silk bag and wearing it around the neck could ward off plague. Others burned juniper in every room, or hung garlic over their doors. One man even tried sleeping beside a goat, claiming the animal would draw the sickness out. The goat died. The man lived. Everyone argued about whether it worked. Historians still do. Historians also argue about how common the Black Death was in Scotland. Some sources suggest entire towns vanished. Others believe the country's sparse population and rugged terrain spared it from the worst. But you don't care about statistics. You care about the fact that your friend's eyes turned yellow yesterday, and now he won't wake up. There's a smell that clings to sick house sour and heavy, like spoiled meat and damp cloth. It wraps itself around your hair, your skin, your memory. You try to keep clean, but the water freezes, and your hands bleed from scrubbing. Soap is rare, and bathing in the loch this time of year is a fast track to hypothermia. So you make do. You sprinkle ashes on the floor to cover the worst of it and stuff wild mint in your shirt. One priest walks from house to house, swinging incense and muttering blessings. He's bravier mad, probably both. You respect him, but also flinch every time he touches the door latch. Holiness doesn't make him less contagious. And when he finally stops visiting, that's when you know he's fallen too. Graves are dug shallow, because the ground's frozen, and there are too many bodies. The bell tolls often. You stop counting after a while. One family starts painting black crosses on their door. Another hangs strips of white linen to mark their dead. You start seeing crows gather in 2s, 3s, 5s. They watch, unmoving. Some say they carry souls. Others say they're just birds with good timing. Food grows scarce not from drought, but because no one's well enough to cook, the fields go untended. Animals wander loose. You see a pig eating a dead man's boot and decide maybe it's time to try fasting for a few days. You lose weight. Everyone does. Cheekbones sharpen. Eyes sink. No one laughs. Not even the village fool. But amid all this, you notice strange kindnesses. A girl brings broth to the healer every night, even though her own mother is ill. A man carves wooden crosses for every grave, never asking for coin. Someone leaves a basket of apples at your door when they hear your sister's fallen ill. You never find out who. You leave a thank you stone on the step anyway. And slowly you feel yourself healing. The fever breaks. Your vision steadies. You can sit upright without vomiting. You manage a weak smile at your reflection in the water barrel. You look like a ghost, but at least you recognize the ghost. The sick house empties. Some walk out, some don't. The air feels cleaner, though it probably isn't. The crows leave. The bells go quiet. People stop whispering. The village begins again. You go outside one morning, and the sun is actually warm. Just a little. The frost is thin. The first snowdrop has broken through the earth near the graveyard. You kneel beside it, fingers brushing the petals. It smells like nothing, but it smells alive. You rub your hands together as you carry the pail from the well. The rope burns still fresh on your palms from yesterday's splintered bucket handle. The water is heavy. The walk back is long. And you still have to grind oats, feed the goats, sweep the hut, and spin wool before noon. Welcome to the life of a medieval Scottish woman where day off is a phrase from fairy tales, and too tired isn't considered a valid reason for anything. Your back aches from sleeping on straw, your fingers are rough from flax fibres, and your dress smells like smoke, sheep, and desperation. And that's on a good day. The worst days? Those are the ones when you're expected to clean up after a man who just tracked half the bog across your floor, then lectures you about the eggs not being fresh enough, while you're also expected to deliver a baby, bind a broken toe, and carry firewood uphill through mud that sucks at your shoes like hungry ghosts. As a girl, you were trained early. By 6, you were carrying water. By 8, spinning wool. By 10, you could bake, mend, sweep, and soothe babies with the calm of a priest and the reflexes of a snake handler. Marriage wasn't about love, it was about alliances, survival, and wombs. You got one. That meant you'd better fill it. More children meant more workers. More workers meant more hands to churn, scythe, scrub, and haul. That was the plan, whether your body agreed or not. The average woman gives birth in her own home, surrounded by other women, using old cloths and prayers. There's no doctor, maybe a midwife, maybe not. You scream into a sheepskin and hope your pelvis doesn't break. And if the baby lives, joy. If not, you bury it quietly and say nothing because there's more work to do before the sun sets. Quirky fact: some women in medieval Scotland wore tiny charms made of hazel twigs tied with red thread to protect their newborns from the sight, that invisible ill-wishing stare that could sour milk or shrivel limbs. Historians still debate whether these were rooted in pre-Christian beliefs or local adaptations of saintly blessings. Either way, you always keep one tucked above the hearth, just in case. And don't expect your labour to stop at childbirth. You're back on your feet within days milking, weaving, kneading dough with hands still shaking. You scrub clothes against river rocks while your bones knit themselves back together. You cook for the whole household, tend to the ill, and if your husband comes back from a raid with a limp and an attitude, you patch him up and feed him tow while. He grumbles about how his stew's gone thin. The idea that women didn't work in the past is laughable. You work harder than most men, and you don't get glory songs sung about it. You don't get engraved dirks or painted shields. You get worn shoes, cracked knuckles, and a kind of tired that sinks into the marrow. But you also get something else, grit. No one sees what you carry, but they all rely on it. If you disappeared tomorrow, the whole village would starve, trip over laundry, and forget how to keep a fire lit. Historians still argue whether women had power in medieval Scotland. Some point to noble women who managed estates, or nuns who held sway over abbeys. Others focus on the crushing domestic burden and legal restrictions. But you know better. You've seen the matriarch who rules 5 generations with a raised eyebrow and a well-placed spoon. You've watched the widow who barters better than any man. Power doesn't always wear armour. Sometimes it wears an apron and a blistered palm. And then there are the accusations. Step out of line speak too sharply. Own too many chickens. Cure too many feversand. Suddenly you're a witch, or worse. Your strength becomes suspicion. Your knowledge becomes threat. You keep your head down, but you don't forget. Even in courtship, you walk the blade's edge. Flirt too little, you're cold. Flirt too much, you're trouble. You're expected to be modest but attractive, fertile but chaste, strong but submissive. And when you fail to thread that impossible needle, the Kirk frowns, the neighbors whisper, the clan sighs like you're an inconvenience. Yet, you endure. You find moments of joy in shared laughter, in songs hummed while churning butter, in the hush of evening when the bairns are finally asleep and the fire crackles just right. You stitch secret patterns into your husband's shirt, not because he'll notice, but because it's yours. A mark of self, in a world that asks you to give yourself away. You've seen storms flatten the fields, war carry away suns, plague darken doorways and still you rise, tie your hair back with twine, and start the porridge again. Not because you're told to, because no one else will. And maybe one day, your granddaughter will tell her daughter, she was the one who kept the walls standing. And maybe, just maybe, someone will write it down. You feel the first bite of winter, before it's even begun. Sharp winds sweeping through the glen, the light fading faster each evening, the birds gone without farewell. You've been stacking peat for weeks, your fingers cracked and blackened from digging and packing. The peat bricks dry slowly in the chill, and they'll need to last. Because winter in medieval Scotland isn't a season, it's an adversary. You've known families who didn't make it through. The snow comes heavy, sometimes in November, sometimes earlier. The thatch on your roof is sagging already. A small leak has appeared above the hearth, and each night you hope the drip won't turn into a flood. You check the walls for damp, reinforce the door with another plank, and hang herbs over the lintel knot, because they'll help with heat, but because they might keep fear at bay. Food stores are thin. You've got oats, turnips, and whatever's left of the salted fish. The milk cow isn't producing much. The hens have mostly stopped laying. You cull a chicken, just one, because you'll need the others come spring. You boil the bird with leeks and hope it stretches. You eat smaller portions. Everyone does. Your belt is tighter now, not for fashion, but necessity. Water turns to ice in the bucket. You break it with a stick each morning, careful not to splash it on your sleeves. Wet clothes can mean frostbite. Your boots, stiff and cracking, let in cold like it's their job. You stuff them with straw, wrap your legs in wool, and move as little as possible indoors. When you speak, your breath hangs like a ghost between sentences. The dog curls tighter in the corner and won't leave the fire for anything short of a falling roof. Quirky fact. Some Highlanders believed that nailing a piece of rowan wood above a threshold could keep out the creeping cold. Not just the chill itself, but the evil it was thought to bring. You've done it, of course, along with whispering blessings into the smoke each time you add another log. It might not help, but it's better than silence. The nights stretch endlessly. With the sun gone by late afternoon, you lose track of time. The fire becomes your clock, each burning log marking another hour closer to dawn. You spin wool by candlelight, or what's left of it. Candles are precious. Most nights you make do with the hearth's glow, casting long, uncertain shadows against the soot-darkened walls. Outside, the world grows quiet. The snow muffles everything. No birds, no wind, just the distant howl of something. Maybe a wolf, maybe your imagination. You bolt the door tighter anyway. The wolves do come down from the mountains sometimes. You've seen their prints before, circling the byre. You keep a torch near the door and pray they don't get hungry enough to try the latch. Historians still argue whether Highland winters were as severe as the records suggest, or whether chroniclers simply emphasize suffering to underline piety and perseverance. But you don't need parchment to tell you it's brutal. You live it, year after year. Cold that gnaws at bone, nights that seem to go on forever, and hunger that creeps into your belly and makes a home there. The old folk say to stay busy, to keep from going mad. So you mend clothes, reinforce cloaks, twist rope, patch leaks, fletch arrows, and grind flour. You hum, you tell stories. You retell legends of heroes who outwitted snow spirits and tricked giants into bringing spring early. You laugh at them, a little bitterly. Spring never comes early. You track time through the kirk bells on Sunday and the pattern of frost on the window's edge. You hang damp clothes on wooden pegs and hope they don't freeze into stiff ghosts by morning. You scrape ice off the inside of the water jug with a knife. You sleep under every blanket you own, plus the dog, plus your younger siblings, all curled like comma marks across the bed. Sometimes you dream of warmth, of heather in bloom, of fish in the stream, of sunlight hot enough to sweat by. You wake disappointed. The sun, when it returns, is weak and pale, like it's recovering from an illness. Still, you open the door and let the light touch your face. Even a flicker is better than nothing. One day, a neighbour knocks to share stew. She'd found an old ham bone in the loft and wanted to stretch it with turnips and oats. You eat it together near the fire, trading news, silent half the time, but not alone. The warmth from the bowl spreads slower than the cold, but it reaches you eventually. And finally, you begin to notice signs. The drip from the roof slows. A few birds return, calling sharp against the still air. The snow melts just enough to reveal brown earth beneath. The peat pile is half gone. Your hands are blistered, your cheeks raw, but you're still here. Winter hasn't won. Not this time. You stretch your arms by the door and feel the faintest edge of spring on the breeze. It's weak, but it's there. A whisper of mercy in a land that rarely gives it. You kneel by the stone cairn on the hilltop, your hands brushing lichen-covered granite as the wind sighs around you like an old ghost with nowhere left to go. This is where your uncle lies, and your brother, and your mother's mother's mother. There are no names carved here, just stacked stones, gently placed, each one a whispered memory pressed into the land. You add another, smooth and heavy, and sit for a while with the silence. This is how it ends, more often than not. You live hard, die young, and the only monument is a mound of stones and the stories someone might still remember to tell. And even those fade. The rain will wash away what little is left, and the next generation will build on top of the past like moss growing on stone. You think of the life you've endured, the scraped meals, the bitter cold, the nights of war cries, and plague wails, and whispered charms for sleep. You think of the laughter tooth, joy in stolen moments, in shared bread, in songs sung with cracked voices beside fires no bigger than your chest. Life in medieval Scotland is not gentle. It's not clean or fair or easy, but it's full. Every hour asks something of you. Every season demands your strength. And still, somehow, you give it. Historians still argue what made the Scots so stubborn. Was it the terrain, the politics, the endless fight for independence, survival, dignity? They write papers about it, give lectures, spin theories. But you know the truth lies in moments like this, when you sit under a slate sky, breathing the same air your ancestors breathed, and realize that just continuing is a kind of defiance. You have nothing, and yet you remain. There's a girl in the village now who runs faster than anyone, climbs trees like they're ladders, and hums to the chickens. They say she's strange. They said the same about your aunt once, and your grandmother before her. Maybe strange just means unbroken. You quietly slip her a charm made of rowan and red thread and tell her not to tell anyone. She nods, wide-eyed, and hides it beneath her tunic. The village moves on. People plough fields, gather eggs, patch roofs, knit mittens for babies not yet born. The kirk bells ring again, not for plague this time, but for a wedding. There's food oat cakes, bannocks, boiled lamb with garlic. The ale is watery, but no one minds. You dance with a sore hip and laugh until your ribs hurt. Someone sings an old ballad, voice high and clear, and for a moment the years fall away. A merchant passes through, carrying bolts of dyed wool, and a map with places you've only ever heard in tales, places with warm weather, smooth roads, and sweet fruit that grows without frost. You ask him what it costs to get there. He names a price you'll never afford. You nod like you might consider it, then turn back to your thatch-roofed hut and the pot you left warming by the fire, because here is where your ghosts are. Here is where your feet know every twist of the path, every creak of the floorboard, every bend of the heather in the wind. You were born to this land, shaped by its storms, carved by its hunger, steadied by its silence. Quirky fact: some villagers still whisper that if you walk the same path to the loch every day for 50 years, the stones will begin to remember your steps. You'll wear a trail so familiar, the wind itself will follow behind you like an old friend. You smile at the thought. Maybe it's true. Maybe that's the only kind of immortality that matters here. And when your time comes, it'll be as it always is. You'll slip away in sleep, or in snow, or in silence. Someone will stack stones. Someone will whisper your name. Maybe a bairn will ask who you were, and someone will say, "She kept the fire going." In this land, that's enough. That's everything. Now, your body is heavy with wear, but you're still breathing the highland air. The wind softens. The hills round themselves into familiar shapes. You can feel the ground beneath you not hostile anymore, just still. And in that stillness, there's peace. The kind of peace earned only by those who've survived every sharp edge life had to throw. You've known cold, hunger, grief, but you've also known laughter, warmth, and the light of a fire shared with friends. You've walked muddy paths in bare feet, and watched the sun rise from behind frost-covered hills. You've bent under burdens, but never broken. So now, in this quiet moment, the world tilts toward rest. Let your hands relax. Let the ache of centuries drift from your shoulders. The struggle has passed, and the story is told. The fire has burned low, but it has not gone out. It waits for the next soul to tend it. Your story has stitched itself into the hills, the stones, the wind, and it will stay there, whispering in every gust that rolls across the glen. Close your eyes now. Feel the air soften around you. The fire's embers glow low. The night folds over the land like a woolen blanket pulled tight. Sleep comes not as an escape, but as a homecoming. You've done enough. You've seen enough. You've survived enough. Sleep now. The hills are watching. The ancestors are near. Good night. Sweet dreams.